This episode of Recording Studio Rockstars is brought to you by iZotope, Native Instruments, Adam Audio, Stealth Chairs, and SAE Institute Nashville. You're hearing my voice right now mixed through iZotope, RX, Ozone, and Neutron on Adam Audio monitors and headphones, all while sitting in a comfortable Stealth chair. Please check out our awesome sponsors using the links in the show notes below, and like and subscribe to our YouTube channel and leave us a comment. It's a great way for you to help support this show. Now get ready to rock.
I see a lot of talented engineers and producers certainly screw this up, who don't understand pacing of the environment. There are times when you need to push and move fast because we're on it and we need to get out of the way. It's just I don't even care what it sounds like, just put a mic up and go. And then there are times when you're I really need to settle things down because people are getting amped up and they're all over the place and the energy is running really hot right now. We need to slow it down for what we're trying to achieve. Knowing how to be ahead of things, and that just takes time and experience, but really being able to manage pacing. I think a great producer can really learn how to manage pacing really, really well and communicate in a way to give everyone this is what we're doing right now. These are the things that are most important that I want you thinking about right now. And we're going to try to eliminate all the other distractions so that we can really be here and in this moment thinking about these particular things.
Welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars. I'm Lij Shaw, and this is the podcast created to help you become a rock star of the recording studio. Native Instruments supercharges your music production with Complete 15 featuring Contact 8 new machine hardware integration and cutting-edge synths, samples, and effects. Contact 8 now gives you the chords and phrases tool for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument for blending organic and synth textures. Plus, Machine 3.0 is here, giving you seamless control over Native Instruments gear and the latest NKS-supported hardware. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. It's your host, Lij Shaw, and welcome to Recording Studio Rockstars, bringing you into the studio to learn from recording professionals so that you can make your best record ever and be a rock star of the studio yourself. My guest today is a repeat guest. It's Adam Krinsky, starting his music career in Minneapolis at the Institute of Production and Recording. While still a student, he recorded and mixed an album for the Alarmists, gaining local recognition. After graduating, he worked as an assistant engineer at Master Mix Studios under Grammy-winning Tom Tucker, and later started teaching at the Minneapolis Media Institute and touring as a front-of-house mixer for artists like Mason Jennings, Dement, and Dave Simonett. Or Simonett is probably how it's pronounced.
Simonett.
Right? Simonett. Oh, I had it right the first time. Cool, man. Cool. Today, Adam runs Bellows Studio in St. Paul, Minnesota, which is coincidentally also where my brother went to college, and mixes live for Trampled by Turtles. Whether in the studio or on the road, he's always mixing. Adam Krinsky, as I said, has been a guest on the show previously for RSR507, where you can hear his whole backstory. We talked a lot about mixing for Trampled by Turtles and taking that into the studio. And today we're going to talk more about his studio, what's going on now. And please welcome Adam Krinsky back to Recording Studio Rockstars. Adam, my man, are you ready to rock, dude?
Yes, I am, Lij.
It's good to have you back on the show, man. Thanks for jumping through some hoops. Rockstars, as I always say, we work pretty hard to try and have good video, good audio, and all that. And we've got complex setups going on. So, Adam, welcome back, man.
Thanks so much for having me, Lij. It's good to see you again. And now we're actually seeing each other. That's a great step forward.
Now we really are. So, it's been a minute since we've been on the show together. Gosh, I think it was maybe 21 or something like that when we did the last episode.
Okay, I don't remember. Yeah, I believe you.
Yeah, it's been years. So tell us a little bit about what's going on in your world now. What's new at Bellows Studio? What's some of the stuff that you're really excited about it recently?
My world kind of keeps on trucking happily. My studio continues to just kind of improve gear wise and always more software to learn and things like that. And touring continues to just keep trucking. I took some time off from touring because I wanted to be home and just kind of get off the road for a bit. And then they kept bringing me back, and they brought me back again. So now I'm back out there, and, we travel the country having fun shows. And when I come home, I get to work on fun records. And, it's kind of right in the sweet spot these days where there isn't any kind of, wild changes. And that's kind of how I hope to do it, get things kind of in the pocket and then try to have a life as well.
So you would typically be on kind of like, it's almost like seasonal for you. Like you might be on tour for a chapter, and then you're in the studio for a chapter, and then you're back on tour for a chapter. Is that kind of the way things roll?
These guys tour, Trampled by Turtles, the band that I tour with right now. They tour about a week a month, and they stay pretty consistent year round. Sometimes, like maybe 1 month a year, they'll call it a dark month where we just don't tour. Usually somebody's got things going on in their personal life, and so we just take that month off. But more often than not, there's about a week a month every month that we're doing some stuff. Summertime, certainly it picks up, and we'll maybe do 2 weeks for June, July, and August. But yeah, we stay pretty consistent on that front.
That's interesting. Yeah, with the in a place where you live, Minneapolis, St. Paul, which is a beautiful place. I mean, obviously winters are kind of intense, and summers are like this big payoff. So is that sometimes, do you ever find yourself wishing that you could stick around home in the summer and you're traveling to other locations?
Yes, certainly that work-life balance is always the trick in life, right? And I think, during the summer, it's hard to navigate, making sure that everything is being taken care of at home. My lady's a landscaper, and so she's busy during the summer. She's crushing because her job is very seasonal. And so making sure that the dog is taken care of and that everything is kind of running smooth during the summer is certainly a challenge when touring picks up. These guys also tour in a weird way in that here we are in February, and they'll tour the Midwest and do Wisconsin and all these really cold places in the winter. And then in the summer, we're down in like Florida and Texas. And I'm not really sure why we don't do the other way around, to be completely honest.
Right.
Go to the warm places in the cold season and go to the, places that are a little cooler in the peak of their summers. So, I don't know. I mean, a week a month seems like a lot, and sometimes it can be, kind of busy for what's going on in my life. And I think one of the biggest changes I made with them when I came back is that I don't have to do all the shows anymore. And we found some really great substitutes that can fill in for me so that when there are things in my life that I want to do, or if I am yearning to just be home, they have people that they love and that they trust, and that makes my work balance 1,000 times better.
Yeah. It's a tricky thing, whether it's working live front of house stuff or if it's even in the studio, when we find ourselves working with other people where, band members, for example, where the band might always have to be on call for any opportunity, gig, studio, sessions, whatever. And yet we want to have that life balance too. I know that's really tricky. I've been there before, and I've done records where, it was where like when a new record opportunity came up, it was like I was excited, but also my heart sank a little bit because I knew, that I was going to be leaving my family, or that there was, I had some situations that were a little bit toxic, work environment stuff. So I knew I'd be stepping into that world. But anyway, I'm not saying that's yours, but, trying to balance that where it's like you got to figure out how you're going to set boundaries for yourself that will work, but you get to keep doing the gig you want. What stuff has worked for you in that respect? Like, what have you learned about finding a good way to set a framework around the schedule you want and still be, still make sure everything works for whatever the project is.
That's like one of the biggest tricks, like the biggest trick is getting busy and having some way of being able to pay for your bills. And then it's balancing your life. And that really depends on the type of life you want to live, depends on, who your partner is in life and what their life is all about. So, it's circumstantial a little bit, but I find that it is pretty common of an issue for people. So for me, it's really, I had to kind of just reprioritize and sit down and really think about what is most important in my life and who are the people that are most important in my life, and then build, from there. Certainly that can be sacrifices. So, things that I do differently now is like I kind of don't do weekends as much. Because my lady works really hard during the week. And so during the weekend, that's important time for us. So if I don't have to do a weekend, I don't. It doesn't mean I can't. It doesn't mean that isn't a compromise that we have to make sometimes. But I really try not to as much as possible so that time is really held up for my family and being with my lady. Then it's just kind of, I try to do as much stuff in the middle of the day as possible as well. So that, when I'm home, when she's home, I'm home, things like that. And so that's just like prioritizing the things that are most important. That's not always going to work for everybody. It's certainly not going to work for every project. And so sometimes we can't do that. And, hopefully you and your partner can sit down and work that out. And we've figured that out, and just by kind of going through the paces. Touring is certainly a whole other bag because you're just gone. And when you're just gone, you have to kind of acknowledge that for the other people in your life who might be counting on you in some way or another, that there's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing they can do about it. There is not like a happy medium. And so if you can't come to a place with that can work, it's going to start to become a toxic environment for your relationships. And that's really hard. There's kind of nothing you can do about being gone. When you're gone, you're just gone. And if that's not going to work, that was kind of how some of the things played out for me. And so being able to find a good substitute who could fill in when I really needed to be home was really key to me being able to have that balance back. And saying like, hey, these are the things that I want. I would love to do everything. I would love to do every show. I'd love to be there as much as I possibly can. There's like, things like driving the truck to and from road dates. It's like, hey, if I can fly so I can cut off those extra days, that would be great.
Right.
And having a band that's in a position to be able to help you fill those needs, who cares about you, is really key too, So it requires a lot of things kind of really falling in place, and that takes a lot of effort. It's a lot of communication. It's a lot of self-reflection. It's a lot of prioritizing and really making sure you know what's the most important thing in your life. And you certainly have to fight for those things sometimes, because work is going to pull at you if it can, and you have to put up boundaries with it sometimes.
Yeah, it sounds like, one of the things you pointed out is just working with people that you have a great working relationship with. When you find the right people to work with. Again, I know we're talking about touring, and this show's is focused on the studio, but these things still apply to doing studio records. I've had to travel many times in the past for records, and it can feel just the same. You can feel like every moment is precious in the studio and can't be interrupted. Precious is maybe the wrong word. Well, it does feel like that sometimes, but can't be interrupted. I guess one of the things that's nice about staying connected to family and home these days is we do have, text messages, we have video, FaceTime calls, that a little bit easier ways to stay in touch, texting photos, or what's the one that my friend Chris uses? Marco Polo. You can send little video messages back and forth,
Sure.
People really like that.
I found that in the earlier days, like touring came later in my career, and I would say the first 10 to 15 years of my career, I was just in the studio. And, those years, I would have probably not have been as good a partner.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Because I was really so focused and didn't realize, I was very, like that was all I really cared about. Almost to a fault in the sense that like when I would come out of the studio, I would just like not know even how to socialize sometimes because I have been just so focused and so just kind of in my own little world. And so I think those kind of obsessive years can be really cool, and you can certainly learn your craft, and maybe you can develop your brand and some of these things. But balance will eventually come into play, and certainly I'm sure there are examples of people that have lives, or maybe they just don't really need anything else in their life other than their work. But if eventually you find yourself just being unhealthy, it's probably because you need to get some other things going on in your life than just work.
Yeah, I mean, that was true for me too. And I always like to think of that as my grad school years. It's like the studio can be our version of a grad school experience where that's our, not the studio specifically, but those early years of our career can feel like our 10,000 hours, where you're just going to immerse yourself. And I think it's good. I think we learn a ton, but I know what you're saying. It was tricky to come out of that. I always equated it to being in a submarine mission. Like we were in the mini sub and we were just gone during a session, and then you sort of come up for air afterwards and
that's
step
very
into
much,
the world.
That's very much how it can be at times. It's such a special place, and when you're really in the creative zone and really that freedom of being so open and vulnerable, which is like the biggest goal in any kind of recording session, especially, that takes work. And when you have it, it's like the most precious thing. You don't want to let it go and you don't want to break it. And so, you really do become in a bubble, a very literal, like this is the most precious thing and I don't want it to end. And then eventually exhaustion sets in, or eventually life catches up, and certainly it's great when you can achieve it. And I think that you find as people's careers go on, especially artists as well, when they're having to be the people in the studio doing this, these performances or writing or being creative, maybe producers as well, you find that there is a amount of time and a physicality to your body that you focus on more and more the longer you do it, because it's like your instrument. And if you just let it go and just get completely exhausted, it will not function as well. And I think younger artists, newer artists who maybe haven't been doing it as long will just burn it down because it's the most fun thing in the whole world, and this is just the dream come true. And then as the years go on, you're like, I really need to make sure my health is intact to be able to do this for longer and longer and longer. And that should be the goal, is to be able to do it for as many years as possible. And if you just
when
burn
do you
yourself out,
remember, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but when do you remember first thinking about, you used the word health. When was the first time you thought about that in your career? I
mean, it would take quite the extreme amount of days, because I will work myself to the bone. I would say in the studio, there was a period of time when I was mixing so many albums at once that I was doing triple headers. So I would have a band in the morning to do tweaks from the day before or whatever it might have been. And then I had an actual artist that was coming in that was like scheduled for that day, that maybe was coming in around like noon. We'd do like noon till like 10 or 11 till that was just completely burnt out. They were done. And then I'd have another client who I was behind with who was just rowdy and about it and like, let's just keep going whenever you have time. And I was like, great, as soon as this one's done, I'm gonna leave and we're gonna all go home, but I'm technically just gonna circle right back around the block, and then you're coming in and we're gonna do the late night sesh. And like doing those triple headers, I was doing that for like a couple months during this was like a handful of years ago. And I remember getting angry, and being very like short with people and testy, and that was a little abnormal for my personality. And I think people were like, what's going on? And I was just really unhealthy. And I remember somewhere when those kind of came to a close, I was like, I can't do that anymore like that. It was very clear to me too that I was just like upset with all kinds of things. And I was just exhausted. I wasn't eating good. You know what I mean? It was just a bad scene. And somewhere around then I remember being like, I really need to focus on not like really managing my schedule and not just burning it down. And then certainly on tour, I watched those musicians have to really manage their physical health. And that was something that I watched play a huge impact on what they were able to do, how well they were able to do it. Sometimes we'd have to even cancel shows if someone was like ill. And then it became really clear to me, it's like really managing your health, managing your time, managing, your ability to do this countless times over and over and over at its best ability became it became very much in the forefront of how I wanted to continue forward.
What age do you think you were at that point where you were thinking that?
This is like early 30s. Early 30s is when I started to be like, okay, like I'm doing this and I'm still going hard and I need to find balance somewhere in my life. In different places, they kept on showing up.
At Isotope, mixing just got even smarter. Introducing the new Isotope Catalyst series, Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia, designed to transform your sound with intelligent processing for dynamically precise saturation, reverb, and delay. Plus, Neutron now features 3 new modules and an upgraded AI-powered mix assistant to help you get killer mixes with ease. Use the secret code ROCK10 to get 10% off the Catalyst series, Neutron, RX, or any of Isotope's incredible plugins at isotope.com. Yeah, that's what I remember too. It was right about 30, late 20s to 30 was the first time I ever thought, I wonder if I should think about what I'm eating, for lunch and dinner every day.
Yeah.
And the first book I got was something called The Zone. And I was like, wow, this is fascinating. I didn't know any of this stuff,
Wow. Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, so let's see. And when you were doing these triple headers for mixing, was this at Bellows Studio or was this prior to that?
Yeah, this is at my own place.
So tell us about your studio again. We probably covered it some last time, but let's give us another recap. I'm sure that between then and now you've made changes anyway. We all do, right?
Right. Yeah. And I'm in the midst of another change right now, and I'll tell you about that. But so at that time, this was around 2012, give or take, there was a producer named Graham O'Brien that I was working with a ton. And, I think every great engineer has this great time if they can find a great producer, like that little marriage can be really great. And if as an engineer, I'm more of an engineer than I am a producer. So I've had a handful of like eras in my career that were really built around a certain producer, just kind of me and this individual spending a lot of time together. And so that time there was this guy named Graham.
Less lonely too, right?
Oh, for sure. It's so much fun.
Because you got like a buddy in the studio the whole time.
And you guys grow together, you learn together, and systematically you just get really good, and the nonverbals become just through the roof. Your vocabulary is just spectacular.
Mind speak.
Yeah, exactly. You can just look at their eyes and if something's right or wrong. But I was working with that guy a bunch, and he was tremendous. He's since kind of retired and moved on, but he was killing at the time. And so we were working on a bunch of records, and we were going to start working on one of his band's records. It was going to be their sophomore release. It was a band called No Birds Sing, kind of like an indie hip-hop band that was like a live band, but very arty and kind of interesting and cool. And we were thinking, because they didn't have a ton of money, that maybe what we could do is just rent a place where me and Graham could work on all the projects we were working on together. And then the band could use the studio when we were working on the things that were outside of that band's time. And so we got this place. This is in downtown St. Paul in this old building. And it's like 1,030 square feet. It's not terribly big. And we were able to negotiate it to be even cheaper if we put up a wall to like make it, that 1,000 square feet. I think originally it was like 1,500 square feet, because we had like a certain amount of budget that like I was willing to pay and that his band was willing to contribute to this. And so we were kind of doing it like that. And then we kind of quickly put up walls and flooring and electrical and HVAC and modified all that, which is a ton of money. And we looked at it as it was a place for them to rehearse. He was a drummer. It was a place for him to play drums 24/7. And it was a place for me to mix, because I was already kind of just like mainly doing a lot of mixing at that time. And over, I don't know, he was there for about 2 years. In that 2 years, we ended up doing like 10 albums that we did entirely down here, which was not what it was meant to do in our mind. So he left after he left after a couple of years, so I've had it for about a decade by myself now, and it just kind of slowly evolves as you were suggesting they do. So I've got a live room that's about 550 square feet. Certainly I wish I could make the acoustics better, but I'm always on the fence as to how much I'm willing to invest in it because it's a lease. I don't own the building, and starting to like really invest in everything starts to become a debate as to how much of this do I want to put in this building and then walk away from one day.
Yeah.
But it's certainly it's relatively neutral. I've definitely figured out its quirks and been able to make it sound bigger than it is. People always want to come down here and do drums, and I'm always like, there's cool big drum rooms out there that I recommend you use and keep those rooms alive in here. And they're like, nah, I like what you're doing in your room. So what do you do, right? That's cool. I'm happy that they like it down here. And then the control room is, also like almost 500 square feet. So it's a big old control room, which was kind of what I wanted in the beginning because I do a lot of mixing. And I wanted a place where we could all hang out and mix and things like that. And
that's a good size.
Yeah, it's big for a control room, I think.
Well, it's nice because you have lots of room for people. You can fit everybody in there, no problem.
Yeah.
Have instruments in and whatever you need.
Yeah. And so I don't have a lot of isolation. So, between the two rooms, I have to like kind of break things up that way. And say, okay, well, the drums are going to be in that room. Maybe a bass player's in that room in the cutting space. And then I'll fit amps and, things in my room. Sometimes, because it's kind of like an all-purpose building, there's other companies and things in the building, although COVID took a lot of them out, so it's gotten even quieter around here. After 5 o'clock, everyone's gone. And so then I'll open up the hallway door, and start throwing amps and things out there or drums out there if I want to. Actually, I love the hallway for all kinds of purposes. It's just like a big cement reverberant hallway. And that's great for claps. Clap tracks are great out there. Sometimes a cool background vocal can be really great out there. So I've certainly done drums out there too, and that's a whole industrial sounding, big, wacky sounding room. So it's fun having access to that, but I don't use it as much until, everyone's kind of gone home.
Yeah. Do you find that it gets used for tracking or for overdubs?
Overdubs.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a super fun overdub space. Just for contrast.
It seems like overdubs is when we get to, try out the more experimental sounding stuff,
Absolutely.
So we can take that time to set it up.
Yeah, absolutely. That's finding contrast right to tape, right immediately as you're recording something is the best. And so if it's a brighter space and you've been doing things in a darker space, that's great. Or vice versa,
So what's the square footage of the live room where the drums would go?
It's about 560, about 560 square feet. And the ceilings are about 14
tiny
feet
or
high.
anything.
No.
14. Yeah, it's pretty good, man. And so what are some setups that you have found that you return to often because you like the way it works for drums?
Really there is a spot that, and this is kind of what every engineer who has their own little studio finds is like where room mics sound awesome. I think that I use a pair of Royer 121s and I keep them in an XY pattern, and if I get them right in the right spot, staring the right place, they can make a drum kit if it's over in the right place sound way bigger than the room is. Something at the low end comes together really well, and it just kind of really can sound big sounding and punchy. So that kind of is key. So I really like having the drums on one side of the room so that I can put these room mics on this other side of the room. So I really like that. That tends to be like a staple. My house drum kit is kind of always set up there and always mic'd and always ready to go in that position with the room mics that way as well. I find that, vocalists are different in the sense that sometimes vocalists want to be able to look right at you and communicate with you while they're working, and that's
which is through the control room glass.
There's a glass, yep, and our glass is angled so you don't get those reflections. So sometimes that's a more confident vocalist or someone who really wants to be able to communicate a lot. Maybe it's someone you've been working with a while. They like to be there, but sometimes they're a little more introverted, a little more less comfortable. And so there's a kind of a spot in the corner, frankly, that I almost like better than kind of more in the center where the window is, kind of off in a corner that's got a little bit more trapping. And if I can set them up in there, I can kind of build a cool little scene for them with like some candles and whatever and a little cozy chair and a space heater in the wintertime, things like that, I think honestly sounds a little tighter.
It's funny you mentioned the space heater in the wintertime because we're talking about St. Paul, Minnesota. Maybe you should tell the Rockstars a little bit about your location. So St. Paul, tell us a tiny bit about the town. I had been to McAllister and I know there, but just probably only visited once. But winters are kind of a big deal up there.
Yeah, I mean, St. Paul and Minneapolis, those are the twins. They call it the Twin Cities, and they're about 15 minutes apart. And St. Paul's older and kind of has been here forever, and it's a little more affordable, but it's also got more vibe. It's certainly getting more vibrant. There's more clubs popping up and more little venues, which is great. There's probably 3 or 4 in walking distance from my studio that I can kind of pop over occasionally, which is great. Minneapolis is newer and a little hipper, but a little more expensive and certainly a little more busy. So, you can kind of pick and choose your flavor there. I've been in St. Paul just because that's where I was living when we first kind of built the studio. And certainly that's where we found a more affordable space. I dig that about it. Where I'm living, my studio's right downtown St. Paul. About a block away is a park called Mears Park, and they do a bunch of outdoor festival stuff there. So occasionally we can just bump over there. There's also the cool little, I don't know if it's AAA baseball stadium that's like right over there. That's really cool. So sometimes we can pop over there. Lots of little bars and restaurants to get away. So that's kind of fun. But yeah, we certainly have intense cold up here in Minnesota. We get into the sub-zeros for a portion of January, February for sure. We were just at -19 a week ago with a wind chill of -30. And
so what's that like? I mean, what's that like getting to the studio and getting to work and getting things, fired up and running when it's -19 outside?
You got to get there earlier to warm the place up. The way that I modify the HVAC to fit, our potential bleed issues, is I cut it off and then ran additional HVAC off of the main
longer runs or something.
Yeah, and so it doesn't get to the cutting space as well. And the cutting space is also adjacent to a wall that is a little bit closer to the outside. So the cutting space will get cooler. And so I need to get in earlier. I give it about 45 minutes if I really want to get it where I want it to warm it up. I use those electric space heaters because they're way quieter. But, you have to have a lot of outlets because those need to be directly in the wall. They can't be on a power strip or they'll melt them. Learned that the hard way. So you got to have a lot of power. So you might find yourself having to run additional power, which is what I did. Let's see, humidifiers and dehumidifiers. You need humidifiers in the winter because it's much drier, much drier. In the summertime, because I'm down in a basement, basements tend to get a little more humid. So if any instrument, let's say like a tambourine, has got like actual leather, actual hide or something like that, those things will immediately turn into just nothing, just really loose and floppity,
right?
In a very humid environment. So I have to have dehumidifiers in the summertime.
The trick for getting the tambourine or any natural skin drum head to come back to life?
Excited.
A hair dryer.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Just have a hair dryer around. You just sort of blow it on that for a minute. And you get it warmed up and ready, and then it's playable.
That totally makes sense. I'm gonna now bring a hair dryer down here. I appreciate the heads up because that totally makes sense, and it's happened. And if anyone has like a calfskin drum head on any of their drums or any of their percussion stuff, that's going to be a problem. So synthetic heads. So I have some extra heads around, some cool calfskin synthetic heads that if that were to be the case, and it's happened, that's why I have them. But now I'm going to have a hairdryer around. That's pretty exciting.
I learned that from Nyema Kuma, an African drummer who grew up in the bush in Liberia. It was one of the first sessions I ever did.
Wow.
And he had his handmade djembe, and he just grabbed a hairdryer and got it ready for it. And I was like, what's that all about?
Yeah, that totally makes sense.
Let's rewind for one sec, because you talked about having a humidifier in the winter. And this is a really important thing that nobody ever taught me until I learned it more recently. I was at a guitar shop and they seemed to have a bunch of things blowing. And I was, what's that? And the guitar tech said, oh, those are our humidifiers. We have to keep it like really careful in here. And then I learned that, particularly in the fine instrument shops, they're very, very serious about that, because the life of a guitar, the life of a piano, a violin, any other fine wooden instrument is directly associated to the steady humidity over that time. So what I learned was something like, if you keep it between 45 and 55%, that's pretty good. I think I even read on the Martin website, when I got a new Martin guitar, they were saying it was right in that ballpark. They might have slightly different numbers. But I also got a humidifier for the studio and house. And then I was like, and then the hard part was like, oh, you have to change out the filter maybe just every year, every season or something
Sure.
like that. What have you learned about that? You got any tips for us on the right kind of humidifier and filters, or is this too tough a question for now?
It's not that it's too tough a question. It's that I'm just too ignorant about the subject. I couldn't tell you. I get humidifiers, and I use like as many as I can get to try to combat the dryness of the winter. And I try to get it, getting a nice humid little like gauge that'll tell you the humidity level is key. So having good instruments to be accurate, I found that those are not always accurate. So finding a good instrument that is accurate, I couldn't tell you which one I landed on. I kept on trying new ones, and until I found a few different ones that were all agreeing, I just tried other ones.
The humidity meter,
the little gauge.
Yeah, what's it called? I forgot what it's called. It's like a something ographer or something like that.
Yeah, mine's like called like a climate hub or something.
Yeah, a little battery powered thing.
Yeah.
You can get those. All these things you can get on Amazon or wherever.
Sure, or your local hardware store or whatever kind of works for you. Certainly, there's a bit of you get what you pay for in that realm. So, maybe start with something that you can afford and then buy something that is really nice when you can. Just trying to keep it in the 40s. I always try to keep it in the 40s as much as possible. Yeah. And that's, some days it takes a little more work. Also, these things aren't the quietest things. There are much elaborate and more expensive systems that you can get into. Obviously, a high-end studio is going to have a built-in one into their AC system. Usually it's called like an April Air system of some sort. And I used to work in an old fancy studio called Flight Time. This was post its era. But we were in that building. That was where that school was. The Minneapolis Media Institute was in the old Flight Time building, and so we got to see that infrastructure and get to know it really well. And they had an April Air system, and that was the most problematic thing they had. It was breaking constantly. But those things are loud. Ooh.
Hygrometer.
Hygrometer.
I just looked it up. Yeah, now I get to Google things live on the podcast.
This is the best. I love it. Hygrometer. Cool. Well, yeah. Now I'm going to look that up when I go to purchase a new one, because these things.
Yeah. So Rockstars, definitely, I encourage you to do that. You're going to find that it saves your guitars too. I think it even keeps the guitar necks from, bending out of shape over time and twisting. You'll have less intonation issues with your guitars if you keep the humidity stable in the studio. So that was a huge win to discover. If you've got an expensive, beautiful piano and you don't want the soundboard to crack eventually, that's the key to that. I think there's other benefits too. I remember learning that just in terms of health stuff, like teeny tiny virus particles they float on the air when it's dry. They sort of float more, and so you might actually be less likely to, catch that cold in the winter or whatever if you've got more of a balanced humidity. So that was interesting to learn about. And then the thing I wonder about, I'm curious if you noticed this, Adam, is vocals and singers. Do you find that vocalists prefer, like, dry is harder to sing in than like a balanced humidity.
Absolutely. That was actually like I was using humidifiers before I even got into the situation of dealing with the dryness of the winters in this space, just because I found it to be so beneficial for vocalists. And it was really a vocalist who turned me onto it. And she was just like, hey, can you get a humidifier in there before I show up and try to get it nice and damp in the room? Which I was like, yeah, I didn't really consider what that would mean for everything else in the room. Just like, yeah, whatever you need, and this was more of an ISO booth in a different studio. And it was really cool. She was very particular about it, and I appreciated her bringing that to my attention. It's just like, having teas or warm beverages or water available, whatever that particular artist needs or likes. There's lots of different tools and tricks, and I would assume each vocalist has their own journey in finding what's best for them.
Do you ever use the vocalist friend or whatever it's called, where you spray the back
like
of your
Vocalese or something?
Yeah, Vocalese, yeah.
I've not had it around. I've seen people use it though, for sure. Yeah,
I've tried it, and then sometimes I'm like, wait, maybe I should look at the ingredients in this thing.
I know,
and it's
right?
like, what the hell is that? It always actually reminds me of those old Bugs Bunny cartoons.
Sure.
Where the guy, like, he has this little misting thing, and he sprays his voice, and then goes like, Figaro, Figaro,
right.
Figaro, Figaro. It's like some head shrinking, I don't know what they put in there.
Yeah, I got one little story for you on this topic. It's slightly, but it's on. There was a session I was working on, and this is good for up and coming engineers or even assistants. This person was the assistant, and a vocalist was coming in to work on a bunch of vocals for this project, and I was like kind of the second engineer. I was more or less the assistant engineer, but this other person was like the runner, the house engineer, whatever. They were kind of the one who was going to do. I was more involved in the recording aspect. They were more buzzing around the building, taking care of things. And the vocalist asked if he would make him some tea. He said sure. So he goes into, the back little kitchen area, makes him some tea. We get everything set up, kind of dial some stuff in. He's kind of getting ready, and he brings him out the tea. And the vocalist takes a sip of it and loses, like, oh my God, what is this? He just kind of freaks out, and he looks at it, and the assistant's like, I don't know. He's like, I'm sorry, I don't know how to make tea. And he's like, what is this? He's like, I don't know. I put 8 bags in. Is that too many? Just roasted this guy with caffeine and just of no, probably intense flavor of all time. So, and
luckily it was a punk band, and they were getting ready to do their speed,
exactly
punk song.
So, that was a fun moment because we all kind of, it took him down for like a half hour. We had to like kind of let him like chill out for a minute because it was so intense.
Dreaming of a career in audio or the entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs where you'll learn on professional grade gear with industry pros, learning through real projects, not just lectures. Explore studio production, live sound, audio for film, and a whole lot more. Or take the entertainment business program to learn about contracts, promotion, and more. With diploma, associate, and bachelor's programs, there's a path for you. Book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. It's funny, and to that point, like I've had interns that didn't know how to make coffee. Like we have to remember that, people don't always know all the same things that we take for granted, even something as simple as making tea or coffee in the studio. And one thing about interns is definitely don't take for granted that they know how to clean the bathroom like you do in the studio.
Yeah. Yeah.
I went so far as to actually make a video. I had the intern video me cleaning the bathroom from top to bottom.
Wow.
And then they had to watch that video when they started. So it's like, look, there's literally no excuse to not know what to do because you just saw me do it in the video.
Wow, that's pretty good. Well, I've never done that. I think when I was assistant, I wasn't always the best at cleaning dishes and taking care of the place. And I remember hearing about the past assistants. They were legendary because they were so good at being an actual assistant engineer, but also keeping the place clean and how anal they were about like wiping down the mirrors and things. And I was like, oh, I'm kind of lazy. I feel bad about that.
Yeah. Good reminder to us, anybody who's looking for that assistant gig or intern gig, doing all those extra things, cleaning up the studio, making things neat, putting things away, keeping things organized, that goes a long way. But pro tip, in a appropriate way, let the important people know that you actually did that in the studio, because if you do it and nobody knew you did it, I've had that happen too, where I think an intern had done some great stuff, but I didn't know they did. And so all I remembered was the mistake they made in the session or something.
Yeah.
That's good to let people know.
Yeah, there's I think that's like the hardest part, those soft skills when you're coming up, and which is impossible to teach, of like knowing when to ask questions, knowing when to acknowledge something that you did and bring it up, and knowing how and when the right place to do that. And some people are just naturally talented at communicating and being kind of cool and allowing to be vulnerable when they need to ask, like, how do I do the dishes or whatever it is? I've never had to do it. And then other people being like, I'm the man, and they kind of are annoying. And then other people that just like don't want anyone to know that they have any flaws, and then they make a lot of mistakes. And that's a hard little world to navigate it. So that's where your soft skills can really demonstrate your kind of ability to kind of move ahead really quickly.
Yeah. Just reminded me, the tea conversation. I literally melted a tea kettle in the studio.
On a stovetop.
I left it on the stovetop in the kitchen, but was back in the control room and forgot about it. And it just boiled away until, the kettle was still there. The metal was still there. But when I went to lift it, it was like it had this yellow kind of finish on it. And I lifted the thing, and and all the paint came off the tea kettle, stuck to the burners like cheese stretching out from a pizza.
The panic sets in, your heart sinks.
Oh yeah.
Brutal.
So
that's kind of the assisting world, is making these kind of grand mistakes and never forgetting them.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's jump forward to not making mistakes, but making things awesome.
Yeah.
Which you've got a lot of experience with.
Trying to.
You're doing a variety of things, but I made a couple of notes just about some of the records in your playlist. So Rockstars, we have a playlist of Adam's music, which you can just scroll through and click to if you want to go hear what he's doing at Bellows Studio. I think you're doing a lot of mixing too. So you may have to talk about, which records, if I mentioned something, whether it was something you mixed or whether it was something you recorded and everything. But there was a band called it was Sorry Songs by Crook, I think it was. And it sounded really great. It just had these great guitar sounds, the guitar amps, and it just made me think to ask you some of these fundamental things. Like, have you found some ways that you like to mic up a guitar amp so that it sounds best to your ear?
Yeah, for sure. I've kind of landed on my guitar setup these days. Certainly, I'm always open to experimenting, but the 57 and the Royer 121 up close to the center of the cone. And then what I do is I mainly record in Pro Tools. I run them to 2 aux tracks, and then on those aux tracks I might have an EQ or some phase flips or whatever I might want to have around. Sometimes it's the the Plug Alliance SSL 9000J. Because that's got everything, a little bit of compression, certainly EQ, and certainly phase. Theoretically, the phase should be solid because I pay attention to the capsules and lining up the capsules of the Royer, which is a ribbon, which is going to be kind of darker and have a lot more bass. And then the 57, which is going to have that mid-range presence. And, I find that depending on the scenario, but more often than not, that 57 is still going to be leading the way. And I'm going to be using the Royer. So I'll use the aux tracks in Pro Tools, and I'll send them both out a bus. Let's say they're both going out bus 1. And then my actual audio track will be the input bus 1. And so I'll use those 2 aux tracks like I would if I was on an analog console. If I was on a console, I'd have 2 tracks on the console. I'd bus them on the routing matrix to a track in my DAW, most likely. Similar thing. You
could flip polarity on one of them at the console if you
got all the processing, by using those SSL channels. It's just like using the SSL console. If I wanted a Neve console, then I could swap it out to that or whatever I wanted to do. But those 2 mics are kind of, I can do a lot with those. If I'm working on
when you say SSL channels, are you talking about an SSL plugin in Pro Tools?
Yeah, the Plugin Alliance 9000J plug tends to be
that's a great one.
The go-to, but the 4K is also great as well. It's got a different EQ shape. and a different kind of mid-range to it. But that setup right there is going to do 90% of it. If I am in a scenario, like I said, my room's a little more neutral, so that means it doesn't have as much ambience. It's not as reverberant. But let's say I'm not recording there, or let's say I'm out in my hallway. Then I'll certainly set up a room mic, if not 2 room mics, pending how I foresee this. I'm not going to go stereo as far as my room mics, if I don't foresee myself using it in stereo in the mix. But I love a room mic. Like anytime I can put up a room mic, whether I use it or not, I'm putting a room mic, I'm going to record it. And, sometimes you can do, I think it's called Haas panning, but I just do it because I think it's cool, is, let's say I have my direct mics. Those are going to be blended. I said 2 mics. Sometimes it could be something different. Maybe there's a 421. Maybe it's an RE20, whatever it might be. I have my close mics that I'm kind of blending. I try to always sum those down to 1 and commit that sound. And so whatever EQ, I really like to have access to EQ. And I don't have a lot of outboard EQs. And so I'll use digital EQs, in which case I'm going to sum, even if it's 1 mic and I want to do an EQ to tape, I want to commit and just run that through an aux straight to an audio track. So at that point, I can do whatever I want to tape, and then I will record the room mic separately. And the room mic, if it's oftentimes a mono room mic, I will sometimes pan the opposite direction if there is a panning scheme at play here, which oftentimes there will be. So if it's an electric guitar that's panned to the left, I'll take the mono room mic and pan it to the right. And that you get what's kind of called Haas panning, and you can kind of fool the mind into thinking about some of these early reflections. It kind of creates a depth, but also can sometimes widen things out if you can find the right kind of relationships. And sometimes, where you put your room mic, maybe you don't have a lot of time, you're moving fast, maybe you thought you nailed it, and then you listen to it in the mix and it's not exactly right. I would highly suggest putting a delay on that room mic. And not like a secondary echo included with the room mic, but literally you just want 100% wet, and all you're trying to do is delay that track more. You could also do it just by moving the region inside your DAW, putting it later in time. That would be the same thing as just putting a delay on it. But the point is manipulating how quickly this said early reflection happens. And so I find that putting a couple close mics up, you can usually find a blend to get at the tone where you want it, a little processing the tape, commit to that, a room mic that's doing something interesting, and then if you can pan them apart, you can really create a really cool depth of field. Now, that's not going to work necessarily in the heavier things. Heavier music, metal, heavy rock music, fast stuff, that might just be too busy, too much chaos.
Right. It basically lengthens the sound of the guitar a little bit.
It certainly can, and because it's almost inherently like a delay, just because it's farther away, it's taking more time to get there, so there will be some delay there. It just starts to add chaos to the sound.
Right.
So, you can play with that and figure it out. But if you're doing more of an Americana type thing or a country song or something that, maybe it isn't quite as fast, you know what I mean? Or isn't quite as aggressive, you can really create some really cool, interesting sounds. And so those are kind of where I'm thinking electric guitars. These are the things that are immediately coming to mind.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So, again, smart move for us to always take the room mic, because we know that when we don't like it in a song or it doesn't fit, we just mute it. But if the opportunity comes up, we can use it. And then your reminder that, we don't just have to take what we get initially, because with the delay, you get to sculpt it a little bit more. And a couple of things I would point out, when you move that room mic a little bit with the delay, it actually brings certain frequencies in and out of phase with the close mics. So you can kind of highlight a tonality that you prefer when you find the right amount of delay, the right width. And then I would be inclined to hit that mono button while I'm listening to it too. So I'd probably set the delay in stereo to see what I like for the width, and then listen in mono and maybe compare it in mono too, to make sure that it still feels the right kind of fullness when the phasing comes into play.
Sure. Not a bad idea. And I would also suggest, checking it in the mix as i.e. not doing it in solo. So like, maybe you kind of dial in your tones and you kind of maybe get a panning in mind that you like, but then pretty quickly put it in the mix. And if you're going to adjust that delay on the room mic, do it in that scenario. And certainly what you're talking about, that comb filtering is at play, and finding the sweet spot of when the right, you're talking about shifting at that point. When you play with EQ, some things sit low, and some things sit above it. And there are lots of like tone boxes, I call them, but like certain compressors, certain EQs, there are certain things that you use that are more utility, that you're going to use it to maybe do more subtractive things and get problems out of the way. But then you're going to pull out your tone boxes, maybe certain EQs and compressors that just add color. And some of that color is just sitting in different places. And let's say there's like 45 1176 plugins out there. What you really want to listen to as well is just kind of the way that they growl and how they sound, but you want to listen to where they sit. Some of them sit higher, some of them sit a little lower in the mix. And if you can really get a sense of that, then you can start to pick the right 1176 for the right situation based on where you need it. Okay, these things are both crowding the vocal. Maybe I want them to sit above the vocal. Maybe I want them to sit just beneath the vocal because there's another part of the arrangement that's taking up those higher registers. Similarly, when you get to this, like using the delay and to try to get a room mic to sit in there, that's kind of what you're thinking about. Is like, it's not just like, oh, is it X far away or am I getting X amount of pre-delay? You're really thinking about like, how is this shifting in the mix? Is it sitting up higher? Is it sitting lower? What is it no longer competing with, or is this just sitting in a cooler way? And that's stuff you want to do in the mix, while all the other stuff is playing that you're working on, to really kind of come to a final decision as to, is it 10 milliseconds? Is it 8 milliseconds? Is it 15 milliseconds? What is it? It's going to be really like, where is it just all of a sudden doing something cool? And like the science of like knowing exactly what's happening is a little less important, as much as like, is this doing something good? And that's something you got to do when everything's in play.
Yeah, I agree. When we're choosing these different plugins, these different outboard gear, it's a little easier with plugins because you can just quickly enable and disable things. But you're long past the point of the science of which one of these does what. You're now at the point of choosing your colors to paint with and deciding, do you like this one? Do you not like this one? How does it work in the whole composition of the music?
Yeah, and that's kind of like where the plugin game is really exciting. Is that not only can you access that many of those tools, like that many 1176s or whatever it might be, but like in the studio, and I think that's where all these emulations kind of keep happening, is that like finding the right golden master is always the gig, right? Of like, oh, this is such and such as 1176 that was highly modded or whatever, and it's like, okay, well, that's where that one will sit. If you use that one on everything, they're all going to sit there. So, right. And then all of a sudden another company puts out a different 1176, and this is so-and-so special one. It's like, well, that one just sat differently. I was just recently blown away by U47 in the studio. There's a few U47s in town here that people have some of the nicer rooms, and I've never been like amazed by the U47. I think it's a fabulous mic. I know it's like the greatest thing that ever happened, since sliced bread for folks. But I'm always like, I don't know, it seems to just be another bright mic to me. And then I went to a different studio in town, and they had a couple, and this one had some modded transformer. Sometimes people in the audio world, and I hate to say, will just ramble on about all this kind of crazy stuff, and I'm just like, cool, let me hear it. You know what I mean? Like, awesome, this is so-and-so's, and they did this to it, and it came from that place, and I'm like, whatever, man, just turn it on. You know what I mean? Let me hear it.
Yeah.
And because like my brain I'm not one of those ones who's paying attention to every little tech detail. I just want to hear it. Like, turn it on. I don't care what brand it is. Is it cool? Is it not cool? And so, and this 47 blew my mind. And I was like, oh, now I get it. Now I understand why people like U47s, because this one was special. And it sounded insanely good. And I was like, okay, get it. Now I see I just probably haven't been using well-maintained or like really cool ones, and this one is really cool. I think it's the same thing with a lot of these emulations. There are lots of ways that 1176s could sound. When you were in a fully analog studio, you had 2 or 3 of those things, and there was, one that would do this and one that would do that this way. Some sit high, some sit low, some are aggressive, some are distorted, some are clean, whatever. And you had to kind of learn that. And if you found some really good stuff, like a really good, setup, I think that's why big studios really took off. I think that's why some rooms became really special. These kind of East-Wests and these, Blackbirds and things, is because they had like some really good versions of some of that gear. Because everyone had an 1176. Every studio had an LA2A. They all had this stuff. But these rooms had like a really good one. And if you were a mixer, you were like, that's where I'm going to finish the album, because that one is special. And the emulation game is just like that. And so now that we have access to all these, it's like, well, now we get to use them, but we got to know why we're using them. So we got to learn why there's 15 really cool 1176 emulations, because
that's awesome.
They're way different.
Awesome.
Each one's way different.
Rock your music production with the updated Complete 15 bundle from Native Instruments, featuring Contact 8 and expanded hardware integration. Whether you're crafting cinematic scores, EDM bangers, or experimental soundscapes, Complete 15 gives you industry-leading synths, sampled instruments, and creative effects to bring your ideas to life. Contact 8 introduces powerful new tools like chords and phrases for instant inspiration, the Leap tool for dynamic looping, and Conflux, a hybrid instrument blending organic and synth textures in real time. And with Machine 3 now available, you'll enjoy even tighter integration with Machine Plus and the latest NKS-supported hardware from brands like Akai, Korg, and Novation. Plus, Complete 15 features revamped Massive X, Guitar Rig 7 Pro, and Isotope 11, helping you shape, mix, and master with ease. Use the code ROCK10 for 10% off at nativeinstruments.com. Howdy, Rockstars. We're back now for the jam session, aka the second half of the show. My guest today is Adam Krinsky, joining us from Bellows Studio in St. Paul, Minnesota. Adam, are you ready to jam, dude?
Let's jam. I'm ready.
All right. Welcome back, man. So let's talk some more about some of these records you've done. One of the ones that popped up that caught my eye is, let me see here. Tell me about Nady May Debe. I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's John Medeski.
Oh, yeah.
Todd Klauser.
Yeah.
And a mutual friend of ours, JT Bates, who played in a band with my brother.
Oh, wow.
Back when he was living there.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, JT's a funky dude. His whole family is like, they're one of those sort of famous jazz families up there.
Yes, I've not met their father, but I know he is a trumpet player, and JT plays drums. He would call it the tubs, and his brother Chris.
I think Chris might be in Nashville.
Chris, well, they have a third, so Chris is the bass player. He lives here. I forget the name of the third brother. It's like, I don't want to even say the wrong name, but they have a third brother who is an engineer out there in Nashville.
We'll call him Frank.
We'll call him Frank. I don't know why. We'll call him Frank. Let's just stick with Frank. It's better. But yeah, JT. So that record, there's a cool story about that record. So that record kind of fell into my lap last minute. And within a couple weeks' notice, I was a live record that was done at Ice House in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, I love mobile recording. One of my favorite things to do, pack up all your gear, take it to some weird location. Live show recordings is a whole different thing. Usually it requires using a split, which is, if you're not familiar, basically all of your mics hit the split first, and then one of them goes to your recording rig, one of them goes to the house mixing console. So you have to have kind of that key piece of gear. Those are easy to rent or find someone who's got one. So that was kind of the plan, bring a bunch of gear, go down there, record the show. If I'm not mistaken, I mixed that show live as well, so I had to kind of double duty it. These days, you can kind of get away with also like most digital live consoles. You can just record right off the console. But I believe in that case, I had a split. But what was kind of weird about that here's the twist to that story. So we're getting ready for that show date. It was maybe a week out, and probably it was even less than a week out. And we got the heads up, the like very, very quiet, you cannot talk about this at all heads up. But Dave Chappelle is going to be playing that night. You guys just got bumped. So we're going to keep your show because we can't tell anyone about it yet. And so it got really confusing. And so then we got all these rules of what we could or could not do. Basically, we couldn't have any recording rigs there. Well, that's pretty hard when I'm bringing in like a whole bunch of recording gear. So what we had to do is we had to load in real early in the morning, set it all up, their whole show, sound check it, and, you know, dial in all the recording gear, and then kind of spike everything, which is like putting a little tape on the ground of where everything's going to go back when we bring it back later, and then tear it all down and hide it. So like their instruments and all the microphones and the live sound stuff on stage, fine, that's all comes and goes anyways. But like my recording gear, I had to literally like cover up with like black blankets and towels and things and just try to act like it didn't exist. And then he was going to be there from like, I think he was doing like it was like the first set of like 7 days, and he was going to be on from like 7-ish, 8-ish, something like that, until whenever he decides to stop. Right? It's Dave Chappelle, right? Wow. And like, what are you going to do? And so
laugh.
Have a blast, right? But we weren't allowed to be at the show, by the way. So we got the code word on how to get into the show. Which was pork chop. Not that that's his, it's every time. But, you know, he had his little security guys outside this like back door, and we could get in if we were like, hey, and they just kind of stare at you, these big Debo guys, and you're just like, pork chop. And they're like, all right, you can go in. I'm like, wow. But anyways, but they didn't want us there. Like we couldn't get there until like 9:30 or something like that. So like even pork chop wouldn't have worked at 9:30. So we kind of, you know, so we hit all our stuff, and then the general, like it came out like a day before. Dave Chappelle's going to be at Ice House tomorrow. Tickets available now. Boom, gone in like 2 minutes. And then the Todd Klauser, you know, John Medeski and JT Bates show is going to be afterwards. And so that's what we did. So we had to set up early, tear it all down, hide it, and then pork chop our way into it after his set, and then go in there, quickly set it all back up, and like kind of set it all up right as doors were opening up. And it was sort of like, as soon as you guys can start playing and you want to play, go. The schedule was totally out the window. And so that's what we did. And, you know, I verified all the lines were working and everything was cool. And then they went and played, and it was a great show. Obviously the vibe in the room was kind of palpable. You know, a lot of people were at both shows, and just the energy of the house was just, you know, because people knew he was just there and all that. So it was kind of a really high energy day. And then those guys burned it down, and I mixed it, you know, in coming days afterwards. It was a really particularly fun project.
Did you forever, hence to be referred to as the pork chop sessions?
The pork chop set. That's, yeah. You know, I feel very confident that they don't use the same password every day. Otherwise, I wouldn't have said it. But that being said, I certainly remember it, because I remember like, all right, here's the password. I got it like an hour before, by the way. Like, you can't get in here till 9:30. And by the way, say pork chop.
Right, Rockstars. You could try like snossage.
Snossage,
like,
yeah. You know, I mean, the world is your oyster.
Baconator. I don't know. I mean, I'm vegan, so I'm probably not going to say those terms quite as often as the next person. But
that's right. You be tofu.
Yeah, I'll be tofu. Tofuti. Or no, what was the tofu bacon? I can't even remember.
Yeah, tofurkey. I think that's a one.
Tofurkey. There you go. That's wild, man. So I want to rewind a little bit, because you were talking about the split. And I've never used a split, but I'm always fascinated by it. How simple is a split? Is it do you have to be really careful about using a split? Do you have to get just the right one? Are there some that just suck and won't work at all? Are there some, is it all like, are there these critical grounding issues, or is there just are there, vast quality differences in a split? And then the flip side of the question is, do they now make splits where you just go into it and, one side goes to the front of the house and the other one just sends an Ethernet to you, and it's already gone through mic pre's inside the box?
Yeah, these are great questions. The answer is all of that exists. There are a wild amount of splits out there. And finding the right one for your scenario is certainly probably the key. Any one of them theoretically would work. When you start getting into converters, like A to D converters, then certainly you're going to need certain splits for certain scenarios. So it really depends on what you're looking to use on both ends. Splits are very, very, very common in the live sound world. They're like almost a mainstay, although things are getting better and better all the time. The quality of them can range, certainly. The functionality of them can range. They get real expensive really fast.
Right, because we think about it like a DI we're familiar with, where your guitar goes in and then it goes right out to the amp and the other side is XLR. But in a split, it's like your XLR is going in and then an XLR continues on.
Yeah.
But the other side is an XLR coming
Absolutely.
out, right?
Yep. And so the idea is really you're just multing something. That's like the concept here is something is coming in that, you have your microphone, it goes straight into maybe a stage box, which would be maybe like, in the studio, we get really precious about cable length and the quality of our cable. And in the live sound world, we don't.
You're just lucky. You're lucky if they plugged it in.
Now, certainly we should, and certainly some people can if you have that luxury at your disposal. And because Trampled, the band I tour with, we use the same gear every night, and so we're constantly updating it and tightening it up and trying to get these things improved as much as possible. But you start getting into festival style shows and these kind of throw and go scenarios, and cable length is just can it work? Can you get it from here to there? But you might have a sub snake. So what that would be is like, think of like, okay, you have a microphone, you plug it into a microphone panel in your studio, right? Well, the sub-snake is that microphone panel, and that might just exist right in front of your musicians, down center on your stage, which would be closest to the audience. And so you're just taking your microphones and you're plugging them into this little stage box. And then that is just basically a long XLR cable. It's just a bunch of them in one. And so that then goes all the way over to most likely monitor land. And that's where your split would be. So your sub-snake is just a very long XLR extender. So microphone into the sub-snake over to your split. Now your split is a mult. And so it's going to be like, okay, cool. Here's my lead vocal. It's going to go in channel 1, let's say. Then on the back of the split or somewhere else on the split, it's going to split it to 2. And now it's got 2 outputs. And now what happens in that split moment is where the gear really separates. Cheap gear is literally just going to be 2 cables, 2 pieces of copper or whatever, just breaking off, you know what I mean? And they just wired to 2 separate output jacks.
Really? No isolation whatsoever?
No isolation. Those are the really cheap
Holy
ones. And you're talking about impedance issues, right? Because you're just splitting the signal in half. That would be your very cheap hundreds of dollars for that type of split that, you're talking probably 16 to 24 channels. Now you start getting into, I would like those to be buffered. So they have like a little transformer or something in there to make sure that they're both have the correct impedance. In which case now you're quickly about $1,000 to $1,500 for a 24 channel split. Yeah.
Now, is it I love this is like I'm in one of your classes because you're teaching it at school setting, right?
I haven't taught in a decade, but I used to teach this stuff.
Okay, all right. Well, I'm raising my hand here, Rockstars, if you're watching the video. And if you're not watching the video, we're on YouTube. So come on over and check out all these where you can see Adam in the studio and everything. And you can see me raise my hand. But so my question about the transformer, is it, do we think of the inside of this box as always having 2 transformers, or is it 1 transformer and the source goes into one side, and then there's like two windings that come out of the back of the transformer and go to two different outputs.
Usually there's one buffered and one straight up. So like one of them is going straight off the original input connector, and then the other one gets bridged off, and then that one is the one that's getting the buffered signal.
Which one would you want if you're recording?
I would want the buffered, but...
Right. So, because you're less likely to have a ground issue and stuff like that.
It's the noise that you're going to be trying to get around there. But sometimes it's the other way around. So it really depends on which one you want to put more value on in that scenario. Who's more important, or who's going to put up the bigger fight? The live sound person, or the recording person? And that's certainly one of those classic, everyone's yelling at each other on a live stage, you know what I mean? Or at least fighting about something. So that would be one thing. Now, all other features that might exist on that channel split is a phase. There might be pad. There might be some sort of
ground lift of some sort.
Ground lift, yeah, that's the last one, is the ground lift, and everything in between as far as what that company puts in there. They maybe put Jensen transformers versus. I'm trying to think of some of the others that exist. So you can get
Cinemag.
Exactly,
or something like
Cinemag.
That. I
Thank
don't know
you.
Which ones are out there?
So there's all those versions out there. Then obviously, as you were bringing up, Lidge, if there is a conversion to be had, so if does it need to go to a digital source versus another analog source, that would certainly dictate what type of split it is, and then obviously the quality of that conversion is going to be a factor too. So there's a lot of things that can happen. Also, there's a wild, wild world of connectors. We're talking about this in the context of a male XLR in and two female XLRs out. There are, in the touring world, more importantly than you see in the studio, tons of large-scale multi-pin connectors to make this a very on and off fast. I don't want to have to go in there and plug in 48 XLR ins and then 96 XLR outs to anything. So you're going to have that patched once, and then you're going to have a giant connector, a big multi-pin connector. And there are tons of those that exist. And
like Elcos and stuff like that.
And M1s and D subs and whatever it might be. And in your studio world, it tends to be DB25 connectors. DB25 connector, if anyone's worked with one, which I'm sure everyone has, aren't great. They're not good. They're always kind of jangly and loose, and
they're great in that they're affordable.
Oh, they're fabulous.
That part is great.
But from a robustness, they are not.
Yeah.
So in the touring world, they're like the last thing you want. In the studio, usually you plug it in and then you just don't touch it. So it's fine.
Right. Fair. And in the live world, you're
plugging it in and you're unplugging it all the time.
It.
And so that would be like the worst case scenario is a DB25. If it was a DB25.
Right. And then it gets crunched in the van and the trailer on the way to the next gig. It gets bent out of shape or something.
Yeah. So we're using big industrial multi-pin connectors that come on and off in like very huge, like giant steel connect. They're wild. And so like that's what you're going to be looking at in your split configuration as well, is like what type of connectors are we talking about. So this is why it's just a wild, wild west of what it is. But you need a split more often than not if you're going to be, all it has to take is two people using two different consoles. Outside of the fact of there maybe being a recording rig as well. Also, it doesn't have to split just once. It might split several times, you know what I mean? Depending on how complicated a setup it might be. There might be a scenario where, the monitor console is one type of console. The front of house console is another type of console. Then you need extra cabling for any guest consoles that are coming. Then there might be a broadcast console. Then there might be a recording console. All of that, it might require everyone getting independent lines for their own preamps and their own gain staging, in which case you might need to split things 4 or 5 times, 6 times, whatever it might be.
Yeah, but we don't. Not for the recording guy. We got our split off that first split, and we're like, screw you guys.
You just want.
Hope you don't mess this up.
You're just like, I just need tails, man. I need tails and an input list to know what's coming down what. And that's like when you get into festival patching, which is like, all right, well, we've got these 16 lines for drums. And then we've got these 4 lines for electric guitars, and we've got these 4 lines for acoustic guitars, and these 8 lines for keyboards, and these 8 lines for vocals. And so that's hard set. and everything is labeled and everything is plugged in that way, and then the bands come and go on the stage, there's 30-minute changeover, sometimes 15-minute changeover, and you have to take a band completely down and then put another band completely on. There's no way you can start from scratch every time.
Right. In other words, when you put the new band up, they're going to use the same kick channel, the same snare channel, same miking on drums.
Yep. Everything's already kind of dialed in.
If you got more than 4 guitars, go play a different festival?
No, then you start, everyone's in communication. Everyone's got walkie-talkies. And so there's certainly the 5th guitar is going to be on, acoustic guitar 4. And that's where that input list becomes, your master sheet every day. And everybody involved at every level needs to be able to communicate in that common language of and you can't just start making things up and put a keyboard on a vocal line or whatever. And if you really have to, that needs to be really made clear. And it will certainly, cause problems. So for the recording person in that scenario, they're probably recording every channel always, and it's just on. You know what I mean? Maybe they start and stop.
Because you don't want to. No harm in recording some dead channels, but a lot of harm in not having that one guitar and record because you didn't know it was there.
And you can relabel something after the fact. You know what I mean? So if it came in as a keyboard and it's on a vocal, you're like, whatever, as long as I got it.
iZotope is truly amazing for mixing and mastering your music. Check out the new iZotope Catalyst series featuring Plasma, Aurora, and Cascadia. Powerful tools designed to supercharge your mixes with intelligent processing. These innovative plugins give you dynamic control over saturation, reverb, and delay, effortlessly enhancing excitement and clarity. And now Neutron introduces new modules like Clipper, Density, and Phase, completing your flexible, fully equipped mixing suite. Plus, the new AI-powered Mix Assistant helps you create a custom signal chain for your audio, referencing professional instrument profiles or your own examples, with easy macro controls to dial in a perfect mix. Use the coupon code ROCK10 to get 10% off Plasma, Ozone, Neutron, RX, or any of the fantastic plugins at iZotope.com. All right, well, so let's ask this part of the question. What are you recording into? What app are you using?
In
What's
my
your
world?
setup?
Oh, man.
Yeah.
So I'm at a Lynx Aurora, the originals, the silver face ones. I think those are my favorite converters.
Those Aurora 16s?
The Aurora, Aurora 16s.
Earlier than that.
The Aurora 16s.
Yeah, I have 2 of those Aurora 16s in my studio. I think mine are white, but still, they sound great.
Yeah, big fan. I've tried the Apogees, tried the Apollos, and certainly in the earliest of days, I had like DigiDesign stuff. And I keep landing back on the Lynx. There's something about their mid-range vibrancy that I just really love. There's a quality to it. It almost reminds me of like an API, it just has this mid-range thing to it that I really like. So I use those as my main converters. I have 2 of those. So I do 32 in, 32 out here at Bellows. And then I mainly record and work in Pro Tools, but I certainly record for clients who want to work in Logic or Ableton.
So I'm asking, well, that's awesome to hear, but I'm sort of specifically saying for the live recording, when you are in recording, you can't dare miss something.
Sure.
What apps do you choose? Do you take Pro Tools out there and go into record?
I do.
Or do you use an alternate like Reaper, for example?
Right. Reaper is really, really popular. Waves has a thing called Tracks Live. I'm trying to remember. I think they have updated it. It has a new name. But there are certainly some free applications that exist or affordable applications that exist that are like very much meant to, and sometimes they're provided by like a Midas or a Digico or something like that. I don't know if those 2 do, but sometimes there's like an Allen and Heath or somebody's got like a little, complimentary recording DAW. These are going to be really stripped down and they're meant to just capture it. And then you're going to take it to something else and finish it. Of course, they would love for you to stay inside their world, but they're just not as robust an application as, say, a Pro Tools or something.
Yeah. And why would you consider, this is a bit of a loaded question, but why might you consider recording into Reaper for a live show instead of Pro Tools?
I mean, I wouldn't, but certainly people do. I think it's whatever's comfortable. It really is kind of whatever works for you. I think that people like Reaper because it is one of the most efficient DAWs. From a coding perspective, it runs really smooth and it doesn't have a lot of problems. Avid tends to be buggy, and when you have it working great, it's great. And until you have it working great, you don't have much confidence in it. Logic, if you're on a Mac, certainly, which 99% of your people out there are going to be on a Mac, is great, but it's also finicky. If I had to say one thing about Logic as an application, it's a tremendous application, probably the most bang for your buck, but it's finicky. It's just everything's kind of clumsy in it. Pro Tools can be buggy, so that's the issue there. I wouldn't say it's as clumsy as Logic, but it can be a little bit buggy. Certainly when it's like connecting with the peripherals, like the different cards that exist for these live digital consoles, that's where the bugs happen. In your studio, you get it set up. Once you get it set up, it works. Once again, on tour, a lot of things are getting unplugged and replugged in and unplugged and replugged in and powered down and repowered down. And this is where that connectivity and that communication starts to fall apart. Reaper has a history of just being really solid. And the coding in it is so that it runs really efficiently, which is why when you get some of the you got a new MacBook and you run it through all the different applications and how many reverbs can this handle, the bench test and stuff. Reaper tends to always do really, really well, if not surpass everybody, because it just runs really, really efficiently. And those types of things are going to be great in a live environment because you really can't have failures and have your computer freak out and freeze up and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a bit of a loaded question because I've used Pro Tools for, 30 years at this point, and the number of times that it has dropped out of record in the middle of an important take or something is more than I can count. So I would, at this point, I agree. I use it all the time in the studio. And even recently it dropped out of record just on a, 3.5 minute song. So it still does that to me. A lot of times you just go change the buffer setting or something like that. But, once or twice is enough for most of us, and I haven't used Reaper in a mission critical setting like that, but I've talked to people like Chris James, who's gone and recorded, Kings of Leon performing live and stuff like that. And he's the first person who pointed that out to me. He's like, oh, dude, I use Reaper for that because it's just rock solid, So just a good thing to be aware of, Rockstars, when you are in a mission critical session where you can't afford to drop out of record. Because I've found myself in those sessions. You're doing stuff in the studio, you get the call to go record something, on location, live in a church or something like that, or a long form performance, and it might be the first time you've done it like that, and you're counting on all this stuff to work, and it's good to know that it may not stay and record that long. Another quick test I've found is, I even do this for things like this podcast, is just make sure before you go do something, you remember to do a dummy record. Just put something in record, let it roll for 2 hours and see if it, and then do it twice. Do it on another day and confirm that it really works.
Yeah, and in the touring world, you also have to take in a few other things, which is temperature. So you're working in a summer that's 100 degrees out, it's 98 degrees out. Your computer will not do that. It just won't be able to handle that. And that becomes a big problem. So you might need to put yourself in a situation where, if you're like the dedicated recording engineer, where you're in an environment that has some sort of AC, or else your laptop or your desktop is just not going to be able to do it. It won't. Also, you have to remember that if you're coming right off the console, which 99% of the time that's what you're going to do now, the consoles just go right into your computer. Usually there's some sort of interface in between the two, whether it's some sort of complementary box, but it's like taking MADI or Dante. These are different digital protocols coming right off the digital console and converting it through some little box to, your USB or whatever it might be into your computer. But you have to remember, these consoles almost are always, especially on the higher end, once you get past like the lower end consoles, they're all running at 96K. In which case, you're recording all of those tracks for 90 minutes at 96K. So like you're talking about I record every single Trampled by Turtles show we do, every single one of them. And I record to Pro Tools, and I record every one of them at 96K 24. And they play 90-minute sets. So you're talking, and I record 24, sometimes more tracks, and I record all of them, even the ones that are not being used, like our extra guest lines and things, because those are our emergency lines. If we have something go down, we just jump to them. Well, if that's the case, I need to have that being recorded too. So
because you're already in record, so when they
I can't stop
plug
it.
in XLR and plug it back in,
I
you can't start and stop.
I can't switch it, you know what I mean? So like if it's going to go into another track, if we've got deemed, which we do, to have some redundancies and some spare lines in case something happens, which occasionally happens, I have to have that track recorded as well. So that means 99% of the time there's like 6 or 8 tracks that I'm recording at that resolution for that length of time that are just dead, but it's just safety backups. That performance is 60 gigs, 70 gigs a show. Depends on how long they play. Some of their bigger shows they play longer, some of their smaller shows they play shorter. But that's a tremendous amount of hard drive space that you need to be able to have access to. And at 96K, you better have a computer that can do that. Now, here's the kind of thing that you say that you're talking about stability with Reaper or whatever it might be. I run a 2012 MacBook Pro that I souped up to the 9s in 2012. So that's old. The operating system is stuck in Catalina or something. Like I can't go anywhere. Like even just opening up Chrome's like you can't even update Chrome because you need to update your, like it's so old.
Yeah. That's a MacBook. It's the laptop.
It's a laptop. It's the MacBook Pro, and I run to a Thunderbolt 2 drive because that's the fastest port it had on it. And that drive I've had for like 7-8 years, and it's still my like bread and butter every day. And I keep, it's a terabyte drive. I keep 200 to 300 gigs available as much as I possibly can. Sometimes I'm not paying attention and it gets down to like 100 gigs before I do a show, and I'm like, oh shit, because it's going to be a little less stable when it's like running lower on hard drive space, and it's fine. It can handle it. I've had it crap out of me once or twice. It's solid. So as much as it's like you need to have a pretty solid system, certainly it needs to be road tested, and once you kind of get it dialed, it should be good. But if we end up at a 90-some degree weather place, literally I take my laptop, I put it in either a AC-ed green room, which is the best case scenario. But sometimes I just want to so I record every show mainly because I'm going to virtually play it back at the next show and tune and dial in the next show with last night's show.
Oh, wow.
And also their management might call me and say, hey, we want to have you mix that show for X purpose. And there's a website now, which if you're not hip, it's called nugs.net, nugs.net. And they're like a Spotify or an Apple Music or whatever, a digital music provider, but they just do live concerts. And they're fabulous and they're really cool. And they're courting all kinds of bands and, from a Bruce Springsteen down to whatever local band can get on their platform. They're tremendous. And so they courted us a while back of getting some music on there. And so now I think we've got like 18 shows on there now. And I mix the majority of them.
That's cool.
And so, they might say, hey, we need to get another show up on nugs.net. If anything really great happens on this run, mark it and then mix it when you get back. Great. That's great work for me. Super fun. So these recordings are like important. And so I record everyone because I need to be able to tune with it. I record it because their management might need it. I record it because it might go up on nugs.net or some other kind of digital streaming provider. It might need to get posted for some sort of thing coming up that, the band wants to make a post about, last night's show was great. Thanks for coming out. All of those reasons. So, because I've put myself in a position with that particular group that I can handle all these different tasks for them, it's important that I capture that. So, those things got to be solid. And if I had a rig that wasn't solid, I would change it. And you're certainly right. I test run it every time I have to go to a new console or I have to go to a new operating system or a new version of my application like Pro Tools. I put 96K on 24, 32 tracks and run it for like 2 hours. And it definitely changes whether content's going in it or not. So like running dead channels versus running channels with signal going in them are different. That's just different RAM, different processing. So it's really wild. So you certainly want to test run it. But if it's a hot day, I'll put it in a fridge. If I can't do my virtual playback and it's just like computer just dies and it just can't handle it, I will run backstage and throw my laptop in a fridge for like 10 minutes to just get it to run enough for playback so I can tune the PA. I wouldn't recommend that because you could get condensation and that'll kill your computer. So it's certainly a risky thing to do. Right. But when you're out there, this is what touring is about. You're just in the thick of it. It's very much mercenary stuff where you're just like, I got to do whatever I got to do to get this show done. And I'll tell you the last little bit about like how touring influences my studio stuff is the thick skin that you get from the intensity and the pressure of a live show and having all this responsibility. And 9 times out of 10, you're the only person who can solve the problem, right? Someone else has got a whole other set of things that they need to worry about. And each of you, just rarely are there like 2 of you doing that job, you know? There might be other smart minds around who can help you, but you're the one who's the only one who knows what's going on with your gear and your situation. Is that you just get really used to the pressure. And I was in a studio session recently in a big fancy studio, and there was a problem with the cue system in the studio. Who's surprised, right? And in the days when I was younger in the studio, or even in my later days, like when something's a problem and you're on the clock and people are spending money and players are sitting around, that is a tense situation. You know, your blood pressure goes up, your heart starts beating. You start to really kind of get in your head and you got to figure it out and people are getting pissed. That used to freak me out too. That was no different. Now, I'm like, dude, I have dealt with real problems. So I just kind of jumped right to it. I went and told everyone we're going to be fine. Just give me a couple of minutes. I got to fix this. I was like really quick to knowing where the problem probably happened. I was able to fix it and we got back online really fast. And the owner of that studio was like, I want you working here more often. He's like, the way that you handle the situation, he's like, you know, I was freaking out and you would just seemed fine and you calmed everyone down. He's like, that was like, I can just tell, you know, and it was just like, well, that is just not a real problem to me. We were fine. Right. We'll fix it and then we'll still get the recording. You know, I have had.
You just went into the band and you're like, hey guys, it's cool, man. It was an easy fix. He just forgot to pay the electric bill.
Yeah, exactly right. I was like, it's on him, not me, but I'm going to fix it. I'm going to be the big hero today.
I went straight down to the electric and I just whipped out some cash. We're all good.
Yeah. And you know, and so, you know, cool heads will prevail. That's kind of the name of the game there. But I found that that's something that I've gained without thinking, you know, too much about it. Is that like when I'm in the studio, there is really just not too many situations that bother me from a tech perspective. Where if anything wasn't working right, I would kind of be like, man, this is a problem. We got to fix it. What are we going to do? And kind of worry about it and be like, hey, we like start kind of get snappy. Like, we got to fix this now. People are waiting. And that just spins everyone else out. Now it's like, oh, well, I mean, we'll just fix it and then move on. Like, it's no big deal, you know, because it's not like we have 10,000 people staring at us right now, you know. Right. We're going to be fine. This is low stakes, you know what I mean? And then you can fix things way better in that headspace. So being
that's
calm
true.
is good.
Are you ready to launch your career in the audio or entertainment business? SAE Institute Nashville, right here in the heart of Music Row, offers hands-on programs to prepare you for the industry. From studio production and live sound to audio for film and a whole lot more. You'll learn by doing, working with professional-grade gear alongside experienced industry pros. If you're more into the business side of entertainment, SAE's Entertainment Business Program teaches essential basics like contracts and promotion to help you navigate the industry. With diploma, associate, or bachelor's degrees, there's a path for everyone. Plus, Career Services supports graduates as they take the next step. Want to see it for yourself? Immerse yourself in Nashville's exciting music scene and book a tour today at nashville.sae.edu or call 615-244-5848. Well, so let's jump back to your studio again. And I've got a question for you that I thought I'd ask. You know, you've got Bellows. You've gotten to know it well. Actually, Well, I'll ask this question, but I also want to really dive into mixing. So like when you take back these tracks and Nug says, hey, if anything really special happened out there, why don't you mix it? And you come back and you're like, I'm telling you, man, every single show this season was special.
Yeah, right. I need to be in there all day.
I got a lot of mixing to do. But if you, let me hit you with this question first. And you may need to like describe a little bit of your layout in the studio too. But if you could rebuild your studio, or if you could redo it, and you had some choices to do some new design ideas for how you would lay things out and what you wish you had in your studio, what are some things you would do or that come to mind?
I mean, I dream about rebuilding my studio every day, don't we all, right? The things that come to mind is floated floors. I think that there's a sound to drums on a decoupled floor. So, as opposed to just having a carpeted floor, a cement floor, a floor that can vibrate, creates a certain type of resonance. So I would float my floors for sure, and then use proper wood, not laminate flooring, but like a proper wood floor, maybe a harder wood like an oak or something. That's just going to get you instantly snapping and punching, and your room's going to just kind of get excited faster. Cedar walls. I would use cedar wood. I think it smells great and it sounds good. It's a softer wood. And so it kind of absorbs a certain way in the kind of high end because it's a little softer. And so it has a sweetness to it that I think a harder wood would be a little brighter and harsher and snappier. But certainly wood. And then, what kind of non-planar, not, squared shapes that you can do with that, I think is going to work to your benefit as well. Clouds, anything that you can do as far as your ceiling to decouple the ceiling from coming straight back to the floor. Also, if you can do wood up there, probably pretty cool. And then having some sort of mixture.
Even with the ceiling 14 feet above the snare, you feel like still it'd be nice to cloud it a little bit?
I would cloud it. And we've all, if you haven't, check it out, the Eric Valentine Drumbrella, like that we've also now all heard and learned about the usefulness of being able to change the ceiling height, specifically over a drum kit. In the case that Eric was demonstrating to the world is that you can tune your snare drum by lowering and raising basically a large cloud directly over the kit. So yeah, I think I would have clouds in my main cutting space. And this is certainly a trial and error process from my experience, and that's what I would end up doing. I think that studio designers are amazing. I think they can bring a tremendous amount to the table of getting you in a great place, but eventually you're just going to have to trial and error it. So you're going to put your clouds up and you're going to play with materials and heights and all that. But as much wood as you can have as your main foundation is going to be good. And then introducing absorption where you have problems, like, flutter echoes, which would be like a sound, that happens sometimes. Versus just a straight slap back or a snap. These are things where you're going to use some absorption to just kind of knock those down. I work on a decent amount of kind of Americana stuff. That's kind of what's kind of exists in my world out here in Minnesota and the places and the people that I've met and get to work with. So that kind of access to natural hi-fi sound is a great thing for me. Which would be what I would put in my studio. That would be my cutting space. Then there's like, a bunch of kick-ass power. I would say the thing I'm working on right now is updating all of my power. I find and have recently really started to appreciate that your computer, your computer screen, maybe your lava lamps and lamps, they don't really care too much about power. They just need it. But your audio gear will sound different if you starve it of power or if you give it good, clean power. So, here in the States, we're running at 110, or 120 rather. If you can get your power to stay consistently at 120, your audio gear is going to sound better. If you starve it and all you have to do is get a nice power conditioner with a readout, start plugging lots of things into power, and you will see it starting to go down to 119, 118, 117. If you start starving your gear of power, they just don't sound as good. So I'm in the process of overhauling some of my power, but you can go bananas on that too. There's a whole world of power out there. But I would get my power really kick ass in my theoretical new studio. And that would also eliminate things like buzzes and amps and stuff like that. And power supplies on tube mics would be happier. So that would be my cutting space, things I would think about in that room. And certainly, isolation is a factor if you have multiple booths and things like that. My control room, a whole different story. In the control room...
Let me add something to power,
please.
If you don't mind. So one of the things that I discovered that is worth pointing out to us is, you can have quality power, or it's isolated, or maybe it's going through the surge protection for all the gear. And then you might think, okay, TV, coffee maker, other things, those can just go into house power because you don't care about it as much. However, what I use a big old widescreen TV as my studio monitor in the studio. And I think a lot of people find themselves doing that too. And then the HDMI cable's running over to the computer. Just remember that if your computer zone is protected for power, but your TV's on the house power, it might get the zap from that lightning strike that goes down the HDMI cable and takes out your computer. So just something to remember about when you're setting things up, that you want to, remember each cable you plug into something else, because things get pretty complex.
Yeah.
Might be connecting you to, the lightning not so safe zone.
Absolutely. You can go, we could do a 2-hour episode on power. Like, the amount of things to talk about when it comes to power is, it's fascinating. And in the audio gear realm, it really will change the sound. Next time we'll do the power episode.
The
and I'm not even the guy to have on that day, but I'll certainly give you my 2 cents. There are people that are very on it.
I think I met that guy when I was at NAMM.
Yeah, there's companies, they're doing it now and they're going big. It's good. I'm glad they exist. But yeah, so that's kind of cutting space ideas. Control room. I've spent a lot of time, and I'd be curious your thoughts on tuning a control room and tuning, really, frankly, any room. But
it's great.
It's another trial and error process that requires you really putzing around, and you kind of have to mix in there for a while to really decide whether it's good or not good, and what's working and what's not working. And I think, I'm not saying anything abnormal here when I say you're looking for whatever it requires for you to be able to hear something in your control room and then take it outside your studio and it sounds the same. That's like the goal. Mm-hmm. Now, we might have to manipulate ourselves a little bit. I've certainly had to do some of this where it's like, well, I tend to like things a certain way. In my case, like, I tend to try to mix with a little more bass. And if I've come to a conclusion at some point in time that my mixes are just too bassy, well, the counter intuitive response is what's required, which is I need to turn up the bass in my control room. So that might be tuning. That might be, I use a 2.1 system. I use Yamaha NS10s through a Bryson 4B. And then I have the Yamaha SW10 subwoofer. And if I feel like my mixes, or when I was tuning the room when I first got in here, and I thought my mixes were too bassy, the response is to turn the subwoofer up in my control room. Hence, I will turn the bass down in my mixes. And so you might have to manipulate yourself in ways like this. If you find that there are certain speakers that you mix a certain way on, figure out which pair of speakers make you mix the best. So, if you need, like, I use NS10s because they don't sound so good, and then if I can make it sound good in here, it tends to sound better otherwise. You can kind of see in the background there these kind of big black tower speakers. Maybe you can't see them, but if you can,
I think so.
They're kind of, these guys, get that hand in there, whatever. Those are old KEFs, K-E-F. My mentor that you had mentioned at the top of this show, Tom Tucker, he passed a while ago, but when he passed, his brother, Tommy Jr., said, hey, Pop would have loved for you to have his old KEFs. Do you want them? Now, those were in his lounge at Master Mix, the studio I came up in. And he would occasionally check a mix on them. And they're just an old hi-fi stereo. So when he offered that for me to have Tuck's old kind of hi-fi, it was like, one of the sweetest things he could have done. It was a big deal to me to have them. But outside of having them, they sounded awesome. And other engineers who have worked down here at Bellows have found that like using those are almost more true than any pair of speakers, studio monitors that I have here, because they're just an old hi-fi stereo and they sound great. So like that's a different.
So they're
set of
behind
tools.
you,
Yeah.
facing towards your back when you're mixing. So you would turn around and listen to them.
Yeah.
Which also gives the nice effect of you're letting go of the controls for a minute and just listening.
For sure.
See what you think.
For sure. And I will like, roll back there and just kind of put my head between them and kind of listen to what's going on. And so I've tried to get my NS10 and Yamaha subwoofer, my little Yamaha 2.1 system here, to actually match those kefs more than anything, so that when I go between the two, it's pretty consistent. And I find that with my NS10s, I need my vocal to be a little more forward, and then when I put it a little more forward on my NS10s, when I go listen to my kefs, it's just right. And so I kind of, but you got to learn this stuff. This just takes time. So when it comes to kind of messing with your control room, there's a lot of school of thought and a lot of things to try and a lot of, science. But ultimately, you need to find the system that gets you mixing the best. And so if that's headphones, great. If it's speakers, great. If it's a stereo and that's not like studio grade monitors, great. Whatever it is, great. So in my case, with my setup, I would go for more wood in the control room because I like wood, probably cedar again. But then tube traps. Tube traps seem to be the only thing that really fix problems. I've tried, I still have it up on my walls now, just kind of like some 2-inch Owens Corning, framed out and off the wall a little bit to create an air gap so that it can pick up different frequencies or lower frequencies. I have bigger tubes in the corner, or bigger, just kind of flat traps rather. And I want to overhaul all of this room, and I'm in that process. So my room, if I panned it around, is disheveled right now because I just updated some things in my rack and my patch bay. I had my tech here. I'm overhauling some power right now, and I really want to clean this place up and bring in a bunch of tube traps. And those tube traps.
So you had mentioned Eric Valentine earlier. Are you sort of inspired by his new design, which I think does a lot of tube traps?
I certainly am. It was such a blessing that he put all that out there for us to witness and get to watch him kind of find that, because he tried everything.
Yeah.
If you don't know, please go check out his stuff. He just monetized it, but I think he said he's going to put all of the studio stuff up for free still. But like he tried a lot of products, and the tube traps he landed on to be the most successful. In my experience, in building studios and schools, at some, like I have a handful of like older artists or like musicians who don't really want to ever get into the tech thing, and I've helped them like build their private studios at their homes and things like that. I've learned that the tube trap really is kind of the thing that will at least give you some sort of change. Certainly clouds will help. Certainly materials on the walls like wooden versus cement versus whatever will change things. But like if you really are at a place where it's built pretty well and you feel confident in the design and you're just trying to solve problems, the tube trap will really push things around.
Are you recording your own music or other people's music in your studio, but you're having trouble figuring out how to get your mixes to sound great? Do they sound weak and distant or lack punch and clarity? Well, I've got a gift for you to help you take your mixes from sounding like basement demos to sounding a lot more like professional mixes. And it's my free course called Mix Master Bundle. This course will show you how to get pro-sounding mixes from your home studio with free and stock plugins in Pro Tools. And the best part is, these mixing techniques will work for you in any DAW, whether you're in Logic, Cubase, PreSonus Studio One, Reaper, or anything you can think of. Are you ready to make your best record ever? Then go to mixmasterbundle.com to get started for free now, and you can find the clickable link in the show notes of this episode. That's cool. Hey, well, so let me see, at the risk of completely screwing this up, let me try and do a screen share.
Oh, please do.
And we'll take a look at your studio, Bellows Studio, because you got some great photos up on the website.
Oh,
let me know
that.
If you're seeing that. All right.
I'm seeing it on my end, yeah.
Okay, great.
So that's the cutting space there on top. That's the first one. You can see the drum kit in there.
Let me try and zoom in, see if that works too. Oh, that's not working.
These pictures are certainly not
special.
current, but maybe they are. I don't know. I haven't looked at this part of the website in a little while. But you can see the kind of the cutting space there. So that kind of corner you can see I've got.
Did that zoom up for you a little bit?
It did, yeah.
Okay, good.
I've got some absorption in that corner. That's also kind of that vocal spot over in that back behind that drum kit. That drum kit over there.
And then this is a control room going into your mixing.
Correct.
Into your or that's the window going into your control room.
That's the window. Yep, you got it.
Oh, and then look, are these the IKEA?
You got it.
Shelves.
You got
Those are
it.
Such classics.
Yeah. And that picture was taken when we first built it, so that's like a 12-year-old picture. There's a lot of new stuff kind of bouncing around that room.
That's what happens in my studio too. You take the pictures when everything's brand new.
Frankly, I wish it was that empty. You know what I mean? Like if you saw it now.
Yeah.
But that's kind of how it started out.
There's the good IKEA lamps.
When you're first getting to put together, IKEA can get you through a lot of pain and agony.
Yeah.
You can kind of see that,
cool.
That's not current either, but you can get a sense of what was going on then. That was also in the earlier days. But there's the NS10s. Lavas.
Yep, the NS10 setting up, and then you've got the Avanta, the Oratones.
Oratones, yep.
Now, did you find with the Oratones, the classic ones, you have to choose your own amplifier?
Yep.
They're passive, right?
Both those NS10s and those Oratones are passive. They have their own amps.
What amp did you find? Does it really matter for the Oratones?
I'm sure it does, but I use what I have. I have I think it's a Van Alstyne, which is like this weird boutique little amp that was made by a guy named Dan Kennedy here in town, who is the designer and owner of Great River. If you've ever heard of Great River preamps and Great River
right,
keys.
yeah.
In his earlier days in the 80s, while he was getting his stuff together, he was building gear, and he built these like little power amps called Van Alstynes for a while, and I got one from that world.
Cool. And then you got some sort of monitor controller there. Is that a Grace?
You got it. Yep, I got the Grace. I think it's the 905. Yeah, the Grace M905. I use the analog version. I don't use the DAC, which is the digital audio converter. I just use the straight analog. It's got 3 sets of speakers on it and an independent sub control, as well as some other bells and whistles. So you can see I also have on the left side of the NS10s and the Artones a pair of Mackie HR824s, which are kind of an old school active monitor. I don't use them too much anymore, but they're there, and those. So I use So basically, I don't really have the Mackies always hooked up. I sometimes usually just don't, and they're usually just the Oratones. So I use the NS10s, the Oratones, and the Kefs, which Mackies, are those ones in the back. And the Oratones, 9 times out of 10, I will use just the left side in mono.
Right on. And then you set up a mixing station with the kind of the racks, the rack gear in front of you, so you have access to stuff immediately, which is pretty hip. I've got mine off to the side, and now I feel like I'm more aware of wishing that I could stay in the sweet spot while I'm choosing some of these settings. But what's some of the stuff that you've got here? I don't even know if this all the same stuff you have today, but there's your Lynx Aurora 16 right there.
Yep, there's one of them. Once again, that picture's like a decade old, so there's lots of stuff that's swapped out. But the preamps are of similar thing. There's just more things now. So that top one is a True Precision 8, which is just a very clean 8-channel preamp. That's kind of my utility preamp. So that might be a hi-hat, some toms, whatever other kind of random thing. It's very clean sounding. Beneath that is the UA 2610, which is a tube stereo preamp. Love that. I use that for all kinds of purposes. Cool for vocals. I also use it on my kick out because you can kind of overdrive the input and get the output established because you got an input and an output on that, so you can hit the tube real hard. You technically can color it and use line inputs if you wanted to just put it on a stereo bus. I didn't find that to be too effective for me. But it's got a little bit of EQ on it too, so I use it for usually kick out and vocals or guitar amps, maybe a hi-hat if I got a really loud hi-hat. Then beneath that, I've got the Great River.
Is that the Coleman audio or
that's
something?
That's the Great River. The
right
guy I was just talking about, Dan Kennedy, that's a Minneapolis, or I shouldn't say Minneapolis, really St. Paul, but a Minnesota-based guy. Tremendous designer and a really beautiful human being, and he makes lots of great
So is the Great River technically the Mississippi then?
There it is. Very good. That's
All
where
right.
you got
I
it
didn't
from.
know. I didn't know all
Way
this
to
time.
go. You nailed it. And, there's a bunch of like weird companies and towns that use Great River. So, yeah, it's one of those kind of names like Great River Vacuums, whatever.
Yeah.
Then you've got
that's
the
funny.
BAE 1073.
Yep.
Great sounding. Can't shake a stick at that thing. They've nailed it. Then obviously you see a distressor, a Sans amp, and you have an Allen Smart. What is that thing? What is that? The Allen.
That's the
C2 or something.
The SSL quad bus compressor.
Exactly.
Basically. Yeah.
Yep.
Yep.
And my favorite thing about that.
Those are classics, which you might run your mix through that, right?
Yep. I used it as a stereo bus compressor for a very long time, which is why it was the most accessible of all the gear. And one thing that's really cool about that is that it's got these crush mode where like it overdrives something. I couldn't even tell you what it's doing, and it just gets really mid-rangey and crunchy, and so that's a cool effect to put on some room mics. And if you really want to get something weird out of it, but for the most part I ran that in multi-mono as a stereo bus compressor, so I didn't have it in true stereo. I like the left and right being different.
Very cool.
In that picture you're also seeing on the top right there, you're seeing what is that?
Is that a Prophet?
The Dave Smith Prophet 08, yeah. Which is
cool. So are you really into keys and synths and stuff like that too?
I aspire to make noise with those boxes, so that's more me having fun. And I've actually that's been pulled out of the rack because I found when I want to noodle with a keyboard and make noise, or when I have someone coming in that wants to put a synth on something and we pull that out, it's just very inconvenient to be there. I want it to be right in front of somebody. So that's been pulled out. I have a lunchbox there now, and it's filled with some TG2s and some API stuff and some weird radial stuff and whatever I can can fit in there.
And then you got the distressor there, and then you've got these DBX 160Xs.
Yeah.
What are use cases for you for the distressor and the DBX 160Xs?
The distressor
mostly like tracking or overdubs, or when do you use them?
I don't use anything analog for mixing except for a Roland Space Echo now, and even that is such a pain in the ass to maintenance. I don't use it as much as I used to because there's some pretty cool emulations. But I don't use any analog gear mixing anymore. I use all plugs. So those are all tracking. So the distressor is going to be used 9 times out of 10 as a vocal compressor, just to kind of manage a vocal going into tape. A bass compressor, and that's almost all I use it for. It could be used obviously in a million places, but I use it in the box. I use the UAD distressor, so I don't use it too much other than vocals and bass. The DBX 160s, those I use for electric guitars sometimes, but not that much anymore. They're not in the rack anymore either. But they were old and cool. Those came out of Flight Time, so I got them for cheap, and I was excited because I was like, oh, a lot of Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis's stuff probably went through this, and that made it cool.
Yeah, right. I saw Jimmy Jam speak at when I was out at NAMM this year, which was really cool. And then you got a list of all your gear up there, so that's cool. So Rockstars, definitely go check this out if you want to see some cool studio photos from Bellows.
Yeah, and I used to have a whole page of a bunch of other like images of bands in the studio and stuff like that, and I found that social media is a better place for that than on my website.
Yeah,
personal
cool. So
choice
Instagram's
there, but
place, right?
Yeah, things like that. If you go on the socials, you can see kind of more, and you'll see more current versions of the studio in that too, probably.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, so let me jump to a closing question with you. This one is one we've done before, but we'll take the Wayback Studio machine, and you go back in time and you find younger Adam, and you say, "Listen, dude, here's the single most important thing you need to know to be a rock star of the studio yourself one day." In whatever context you feel like answering it, what comes to mind for you? What advice would you like to go back and give yourself if you could?
I remember, actually, now that you brought this up, I remember answering this last time, and I feel similar, which is just to be patient and know that it takes time to get good at it. But I think to add to that today, I think that the thing is like, it really eventually becomes a game of who you are as a person. And the people that are going to want to hang around you, and the people who are comfortable being around you are going to be the people that continue coming back to you. I think there is an expectation that everyone gets good, but I think that you don't even necessarily always have to be like, especially in a tracking scenario. That is so much about the hang and so much about being a good person. And there is, people talk and people will say great things about you and that will get you work. And people will say bad things about you if they did not have a good experience, and that will slow down your work or stop it entirely. Like, you can lose everything fast if you're not a good person. So treating people well, I think sometimes people are like, I got to get on my grind, I get on my hustle and, whatever, and like make money. And it's like, that's cool. And like, I'm not saying, being goal oriented is a bad thing, but like really being a good person and treating people well and doing everything you can to make people comfortable and feel, especially in a recording situation, safe is everything. And it will be the thing that you want to be most careful with who you, with your branding and your marketing, is you want people to say this person is just a really great person to be around. And if that's where you land, I guarantee you, while you're figuring it out, you will stay busy. Because people will give you breaks on not having everything figured out yet if they just really like being around you. So that's probably the biggest thing. Certainly having some obsessive years on the technology and like spending, your 10,000 hours and all that is important. But being a good person is going to be huge, and not screwing people over, not getting a big ego, demanding things, acting like you deserve everything, being entitled to things, blaming other people. Like, that's just, you're just not going to last. You're just really not. There's just too many good people out there for people to be around. And I find that people in their recording scenario, like, being comfortable to be wrong, to make mistakes, and not feel like they're being judged or being shamed or being made fun of. Like, these things are everything for them, because you're really asking people to open up. You're really, really asking them to dig deep. And maybe as people grow up and they get older and they've been around longer, they get more comfortable being put in the hot seat. But for these newer artists, especially younger artists, like, that is a intimidating environment. It is really, really scary. And if they're the only person on the other side of the glass, and there's you and a producer and the other bandmates and whomever else is hanging out, that is really uncomfortable. So trying to like give them the ability to feel comfortable, whatever that, kicking people out of the room, not letting everybody be there, but like figuring out a way to do all that in a respectful way will mean the everything to the person who's performing.
Yeah.
So that stuff.
I find, an understanding that I started to come to was, there's the comfort, uncomfortable, but it's also just as simple as, like, a musician who comes into the studio, they know how to play music. That's why they're there. Some know better than others, but on whatever their level is, they know what they normally do. And when you throw them into the studio, it's so easy for them to become disoriented, and so like trying to avoid that disorientation. I think that's smart, keeping everybody comfortable like that.
And then pacing, right? Like, knowing how to run a session is also a big deal. I see a lot of talented engineers and producers certainly screw this up, who are like, don't understand pacing of the environment. Of like, there are times when you need to push and move fast because like we're on it and we need to get out of the way. It's just like, I don't even care what it sounds like. Just put a mic up and go. And then there are times when you're like, I really need to like settle things down because people are getting amped up and they're all over the place, and like the energy is running really hot right now. We need to like slow it down for what we're trying to achieve. And knowing how to be ahead of things, and that just takes time and experience, but really being able to like manage pacing. I think a great producer can really learn how to manage pacing really, really well and communicate in a way to give everyone like, this is what we're doing right now. these are the things that are most important that I want you thinking about right now. And we're going to try to eliminate all the other distractions so that we can really be here and in this moment thinking about these particular things. Engineers are really good at like, I hooked it up and it's working, go. Right. And that's great. You know what I mean? But like, that's necessarily always the vibe. I think that producer, and sometimes it's the engineer, and oftentimes these days it can be the same person. If you can really help people understand what we're focused on in this moment and the place that they need them to be in, and then the speed or the control of the energy that we need to be in while we're doing that is like, man, if you can really get your hands on that energy and be able to do that, you're going to just get such great performances, and people are going to be so proud and excited about it. They can't wait to come back and work with you to have you do that for them again, because it's hard to manage that on your own sometimes.
Yeah, that's great. Well, thank you for hitting the show with us again. Adam's totally awesome to have you here. Let the Rockstars know, where can they come find out more about you? What if they're up in that area around the Twin Cities and they just want to come make a killer record, or if they're looking for somebody to connect with for a mix, how should the Rockstars find you online? Yeah,
man, the best thing is email, Adam Krinsky @gmail. No special characters, dots, or anything like that. Please hit me up. I'm always looking to mix someone else's project. Test mixes are always fun to find out where I fall in the spectrum of things. So Adam Krinsky @gmail is the best way to find me. You can check out some of my work at adamkrinsky.com. And all my socials, they're connected to all these things, so you'll be able to find them pretty quickly. If you're in Minnesota, I would say hit me up on that email, and then we can link up for a coffee or a beer, something like that, and talk about what you're up to. I'd love to hear about it.
Right on. They probably have the studio warmed up already.
It will be in the wintertime. Yeah, in summertime, I'll be trying to cool it down.
That's right. And then Krinsky Rockstars, K is all over the place. It's all K. All K all day.
There you go. KRINSKY. That's right. You can find me. And I look forward to everything, man. Life is good. I'm so thankful to have you invite me back on. It's so good to see you. You're looking well, by the way.
Thanks, man. I'm trying to get younger every day if I can.
You look great.
We'll see how long I can keep it up.
Yeah, man. Awesome.
Well, good. Thanks so much for joining us, Rockstars. Thanks for watching. And Adam, it's great to see you again, man.
We'll see you again. Take care, everybody.
All right. Cheers. Thanks so much for listening to Recording Studio Rockstars. If you enjoyed the show and want to help make it better, then please share this episode with your friends on social media and leave a rating and review on iTunes to help the podcast reach more rock stars like yourself. You can click directly over to iTunes or go to rsrockstars.com/review for an easy explanation. And remember to hit the subscribe button to keep up with weekly episodes. And if you're ready to make your best record ever now, then head over to Recording Studio Rockstars Academy, where you can start with my free course at mixmasterbundle.com. Thanks so much for listening, and thanks for being a rock star. I'm Lid Shaw, and this is Recording Studio Rockstars. Now, go make great music. Recording Studio Rockstars would like to give a big thank you to our awesome sponsors who help make this episode possible: Isotope, Native Instruments, Adam Audio, Stealth Chair, and SAE Institute Nashville. And remember to take advantage of our special coupon codes at isotope.com, nativeinstruments.com, or stealthchair.com. Use the coupon code ROCK10 for 10% off any plugin or chair purchase. If you enjoyed Recording Studio Rockstars, please check out our sponsors using the links in the show notes. These are all things I highly recommend for your studio. They're going to help you make your best record ever. And please like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, because it's a great way to help support this show. And leave us a comment below to let us know what you thought of this interview or who we should have on as a guest in the future. I would also like to thank our fantastic team here at Recording Studio Rockstars, Vlad Weselchenko and Liz Hulitskaya. Thanks so much for watching and listening, Rockstars, and we'll see you in the next episode. Cheers.